Sharps, you would get it, wouldn't you? I'm sitting out here. See, the intro on here, you guys don't know it, and that makes me a sociopath sometimes, being a psychopath. By definition, it gives me an apple and a photon to drop in the cyclotron hadron collider here for whatever it was. So we're actually going to go back to it here. Because it was a bit about Sharps would get it, Salty, because I was coming in beast mode and we're about to drop 100% Ultra Nightmare Lucy Doomslayer. 100% Ultra Nightmare Doomslayer Lucy, because it was her. Now we're going to go back to the guy and see what his concepts were and see if we can find any mathematical concepts just under those two situations comparatively to the box. What is an environment where I would get multiple indexes of different systems coming across the schizo, sociopath, PSTD, hypervigilance, both positive and negatives, up, down, up, and down, you be pushing. It's like, come on, you know I'm going to slip them in there because I'd rather have them pushing like this on the right-hand rule. Get them back when I'm setting them up. Say something like congruency to M1 and M2 of this conversational model have a lot of things in common with thinkity, spokety, blinkety, winketies on the 42 brain pan of the neural net variables of a heart rate monitor that could be engineered into the form of a ring and applied to certain blockchains of certain values and give somebody some purpose, some standards in terms of graphing schematical systems inside of here of XYZ topologies of the button and something like the droid over here, or how I might be able to autonomously do certain things of how that applies inside of the system. You know, like I said, I don't mean to look down on you. I would just say, as a psychopath, there's certain times where you got to get the hell out of my office right now and do stuff. Button. I mean, come on, just hit it, get it. Yeah, over here. You know, nothing wrong with Purgatoni if I wanted to drop it, but you'd have to hang on to my subject matter for understanding. You know, we're going to call it executive plus for the differential, but it could be Paris Island, regular to any standard. Let's call that the Finland flag. It's close, maybe. You know, being an American, probably have a little bit of red, white, and blue inside of there, given some fuzzy Feynman diagrams that I put in here for Lagrangian's lambda on the rabbit pop calculation, considering the woofs and the standards of alpha and beta by variables of M1 and M2 congruency inside of the system. Congruency would be the house. A lot about Bernoulli's work as an M1 standard, 100 ways to get tungsten rod wrong here, being a 3-inch round plasmic blast that is a lightning bolt from cloud to ground with you emitting a charge negative up on the system, which would be from a right-hand rule of those standards. Get it, 42. So actually, let's go do that. Let's go back here and hit that history note. Esoterics, eschatology is usually a good place to start with that one. You know what eschatology is?
If you're dealing with depression or anxiety,
I wonder, and if your work ledger, you understand quite who you are in this thing, derivative L, C, D, and L, both in the devil's name, and given the math, you're yours.
Therapy for all.
I think she wrote down happy, angry, hungry.
And her partner in the exercise
was like, hunger is not an emotion, but it is a feeling, you know? And if you're kind of like psychopathic, then that's kind of where you're focusing. It's like, this is what I...
So, well, what do we got here? Do you feel remorse? This is a very common problem for what is known, I've heard about a long time ago on the eschatology here. Eschatology, esoterics being, well, let's talk about it at the water cooler and just make some friendly conversation. That's esoterics, kind of. It's a very strong right-hand rule. M1 definition, Bernoulli's congruency to M2 in the way to form some of the dimensional analysis by saying, well, in this number, kind of plus and divided by this number multiplied and squared into this, you wind up with IH black hole in a two-phase smaller index, which is still I or H. The infinity of the smallest set could be hot or cold, and I can indicate that by 1 or 0, and I can also say between the terms on those things it starts to Pensrow through certain variables of those dimensional axes to say bits and bytes, 1s and 0s that come across this in general programming for beating the devil out of it with Bob Rossi on ZBrush and GPT-3. I'm driving the car, Karen. So this is really all they got here. I don't know if that's the full video series. It seems like there's some other stuff in here. Psychopathy. I married a psychopath. So it seems like their main model inside of it, which is dangerous. This is math by a classical standard of what is a psychopath inside here. I often catch big beasts where I could dust off a certain adjustment on side of their shoulder because I'm glassing it from the other side, watching them make some sharps turns. So see how there's a little beast mode inside of there? Well, there's also an energy reference in terms of Euler's numbers and having those Schrödinger multi-world circumstances available to you in terms of how you've been most commonly positioned or orientated in this position or program to how the common result should look. And then you would challenge that back on time, right? Like I'm arguing -1 and +1. Am I going to make it? Is that on an M2 stretched out string where you're feeling an increase of some form of pressure system inside of the system, or is that hot plasmic coming straight in the ear from some boss or something, or you were a kid? Let's talk about that, because I think we've all been one here on terminal velocity of general times around this planet, and what might be a differential that's still common 0 to 1 on the expansion notes of some of these systems. I say with an adult, I would eventually get there and might want to quantify not to get too old, or excuse me, too young, old, or some variable on there. I want to be in a multi-spectrum of that, which can get pretty schizo. Somebody call it off inside of there. Right-hand rule, great definition. But we weren't necessarily talking about me in that standard. We were talking about a situation that might present itself on the HUD when you change out the field theory equation, not just by some arbitrary standard, but by a scientific, very rigid scaffolding work of dimensional analysis and trying of XL, A-B definitions of A-B definitions, but also multi-spectrums of ages and different topologies. One, they're all individually equal to the first definition, M1 and M2, because A, delta B give you a changeover in the forces of those dimensions of fields changing over between north and south on index to a fixed orientation of copper coils inside of a system. The amount of copper coils in that system, up or down, up, down, up and down to the thicknesses of those copper coils inside of a system, how well that oxidizes, or what kind of solution you got that in if you're going to use electrolysis or something like strip steer to refine a system like this, or get a current to travel directly through any one of these systems, passing it through. There be an example of axes and certain other standards. My job is to compare you to me playing in the Olympics, and you're also there, and so is Draga astronaut over there, and something we have to deal with sometimes. That would be an astronaut Navy SEAL. Yeah, go figure, that thing's out there. Apparently this 142. All right.
How do you stop yourself from doing things you shouldn't?
There are techniques for me to suppress this too, and I use techniques now to try to suppress my.
What were you doing that you shouldn't have done? I don't mean we're talking about like deciding to hit a deer, like go crash into a deer, or run down a bunch of people in a biking marathon because you need to get through on the system. That seems like more of a pressure situation of long-term exposure to a stoichiometric golden ratio of common indexes of that to form whether what pattern that is. Remember, we're looking at the keyhole on the target of a scattered pattern of a Hubble or a harmonic oscillator. Doomslayer, Ultra Nightmare. 100%. These are programs. Remember, murder button going to be XYZ in the same way to the orientation position of XY, XY. 1, X1, -1, +1, how I'm adjusting for certain bugs and systems that commonly come through those general limits in that field. He keys off to being psychopath. You key off to be a stonemason, a carpenter, a fisher, whatever math book you're using.
Because, you know, I don't know.
Look at the
if-
town.
what if
You know,
I
you
was met with
need
same
competition with
circumstances?
each
If I
other
didn't
for
marry
certain
this woman,
standards,
if I
and that
didn't grow up in
sometimes
that
challenges
family,
psychologists
if
on
I
this. You
go
can't.
on and on,
Great,
there are
you
certain
work them to a
protective
mathematical
things,
consult
and I never
because
needed
it makes
the
you
money,
far.
I never
Good on you,
needed the
King.
sex, I
You know,
never
it makes you
needed
go
violence.
farther on the
There was-
system,
there was
but
no
this
need there to
becomes
begin with.
bullshit
So,
of a Nephilim system that starts
I'm
burning
certainly
down the
not
ground.
trying to convince you I'm a nice or good guy. It's just that I
And
never
not
had
just him. It would
need
be
to
the
do
teacher to
anything
put this
other
in here
than
and not correct you
to
on it. Really is a
manipulate
dangerous
the way
subset of standards.
I'm telling you, but I never thought to myself, I am now manipulating this person. Now I know I can
There's math class.
recognize it,
Physics.
and then I try to inhibit it.
You take,
I have
what
to
college
think about it
classes
every
do you
day.
take? I'll go over
Every
there to
day,
your
go
lodge
do
and
that
kick your
thing.
Master Mason
And
square
so
in
it's
the
a
dick.
war. So
They
it's
will
been
land
going
on Mars and they can
7,
fuck off
8
my
years
planet.
trying to suppress that behavior. The other person
I
doesn't
did.
know it, right?
I was like, she
But
went to
I'm
the beach.
trying to
How
be
much of
like a
that free
regular
time
guy
inside
and
here
not
wasn't
be-
study time?
always pitching them in some
Sorry,
way,
brother.
not to sell
You did
them,
great.
get
He's
anything
still
from them,
standing,
just
fairness.
own them. So